Hello and welcome back to Superboy Beyond. This is Chris, and with me as always is Tom. Today, we're not going to be doing anything Superboy related. We're going to actually be focusing on the Beyond. And today, given my shirt, and Tom, if you will.
Yep, we've just recorded a commentary for the episode Knick Knack where I was wearing this hoodie, but now I get to zip it up and we're going to talk some Star Trek.
Yes, we are going to talk the first 3 episodes of Strange New Worlds Season 2.
Indeed. We've discussed, obviously, if you've been watching our channel for some time now, you know that we end up talking about Star Trek pretty often. You know, we're both massive Trekkies. It's going to pop up every now and then, especially when we watch episodes like Test of Time by David Gerrold, considering he is the guy that created the Tribbles. And, you know, he's kind of a Star Trek legend just for that alone. Like I wish that I knew where my Tribble was, because I do own a Tribble somewhere. I just hope that whatever box in my basement it's stuck in hasn't got any kind of food in it, because that's going to be a disaster when I open it up. We'll see what happens. But we're going to talk about some Star Trek. Strange New Worlds, which, you know, I've said on the show before, it is my favourite of the current era Star Trek shows, although Picard Season 3 did come pretty damn close, I must say.
Yes.
I think we've been in agreement before now that maybe Strange New Worlds Season 1 is the strongest first season of any Star Trek show since the original. Because, let's face it, typically the first season of any Star Trek show is usually pretty bad. I think the only other ones that haven't had that problem more recently were like Lower Decks. Season 1 was pretty good, although I'll be honest, it's never made me laugh. I enjoy the stories. The humour doesn't do anything for me, which is weird, because, I mean, we've talked about the fact that I own a book by the showrunner that's a Star Trek 8th season thing, and that book has made me laugh a bunch of times. Don't know why the show doesn't. It's weird, but I do like the show overall. And Star Trek Prodigy, which has just been cancelled and removed from Paramount Plus, maybe, you know, I'd say that Prodigy might actually be the second best of the current era Star Trek shows. It's so sad that it's gone. But, so we're going to talk about Strange New Worlds. Obviously, we've mentioned Season 1 in passing time and time again, so we're cutting straight to Season 2. This episode will likely be going up before our commentary on Knick Knack does. So, yeah, I'm going to try and get this up early, just so at least we're somewhat keeping in time with as the show airs.
Yes.
But should we start just talking about Season 1 briefly, what we enjoyed about that and what we hope to see moving into Season 2 a little bit before we actually get into the discussion? What I liked most about Season 1 was the fact that, look, Picard Season 3 is an updating and modern restylization of TNG, DS9 and Voyager, sort of the Berman era Trek.
Yes.
Whereas I think Strange New World Season 1 was really good at sort of modernizing the TOS tone. Like, TOS was a very comedic show. I mean, we've already mentioned Tribbles once today.
Yes.
You know, there were some really funny episodes in that. And it's one of these things. I know that people like to complain about Ortegas. It's a character because she's always, like, you know, making wisecracks and stuff like that. She's rubbing a lot of people the wrong way. But, I mean, I don't know. It would be fun to talk about this a little bit, I think. But I kind of see her as just a female Tom Paris. You know, she's the pilot. She's a bit of a renegade. She's got a bit of an attitude. But at the end of the day, it's like, you know, with Star Trek.
Her interaction with Uhura in that first season is very much like, you know, the friendship that was built between Tom and Harry.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, Tom was constantly, you know, playing little jokes on Harry. Like, Harry would ask Tom for help with women and stuff, and occasionally Tom would give him a bit of bad advice just because he thought it'd be funny. Like, it's at the end of the day, I think a lot of people were just like, well, they should be professionals. They should be acting like professionals at all times. It's like, so you want them to be drones? because the fact of the matter is, like, it's Star Trek. Let's face it. Gene Roddenberry has said this. He used to sell, I think, badges or pins or whatever with this on it. It's infinite diversity and infinite combinations. That's kind of the motto of Trek,
Yes.
according to Roddenberry. Okay, it was a little bit after the fact originally. Like he came up with that later, but it still counts. He's the creator of the show. But it's like that's not just about different species or orientations or anything like that. Like it's about difference of personalities. And let's face it, like the different viewpoints and different ways of looking at situations is what made characters like Scotty and Data like so brilliant, because they have a viewpoint, they have a different way of looking at a situation that no one else in their position could have done. Like just look at how Scotty just had the entire Enterprise over time just like rigged up in such a way that any other engineer came onto that ship, they wouldn't know what the fuck was going on.
Yeah.
But it works, and Scotty is able to get the absolute best out of that ship at any given time. Like he's given her all she's got, Captain, and he means it. Like no, like if every personality in Starfleet was basically just the same, they might as well just let the fucking Borg assimilate them.
Yes.
Really, that's the way I look at it. So yeah, Ortegas is like people get funnier, like get mad at Ortegas because she makes a few jokes. They say maybe she's a little bit disrespectful, but the fact is you need to look at how the other characters react to her as well, because clearly she has their respect. That she wouldn't be getting away with this if she didn't have their respect, and
Yeah,
it's the kind of thing.
You can just see it with the way Pike reacts to her when he first brings her aboard. He mentioned something that was in her file, and
something about she wants to be the greatest pilot that Starfleet has ever known, and he's like, now's your chance to prove it.
Yeah.
And it's just like it's great. And it's the kind of thing as well, because like just looking Picard season 3 when 7 of 9 is saying she's having trouble following orders, and Picard is like, well, if you ever figure out how to follow orders easier, would you let me know? Because I never did. Like I can see Ortegas at the moment. She's so different from what we're used to. She's probably going to make a pretty damn good captain someday, if she's not killed off. But I hope she's one of the ones, like, let's face it, if they appear in TOS, they're safe. If they don't, they're not. So she may die before the show is out. I really hope not, though, because
and already we already know that there's only two main characters of that show who are, well, actually four main characters of that show who are going to make it to the TOS era, and that's Spock, Uhura, Chapel, and Mbenga. Yeah, that's it.
I mean, number 1 never gets another mention, does she? Wait, no, is number 1 not in the animated series?
No, she is not.
Huh. Okay, well, I don't know what happens to number 1 then. I hope she doesn't die. Yeah. I hope it's just a case of she's still out there, she's just not mentioned.
There's been novelizations where it shows that she eventually becomes a Commodore, but,
they're still very loose canon, aren't they? They're extended universe. They're not actually canon until they're referenced in the shows.
Yeah.
It's just always the way.
And I love the fact that Rebecca Romijn is doing such a great job. Yes, she's still bringing forth everything that Majel Barrett did in the first, pilot. But she's expanding on that.
Yeah. And it's funny, like, let's face it, if you're watching this and you're a massive Trekkie, like, I'm going to preface this by saying, obviously we love Majel Barrett. She's a legend. She's not just the voice of the computer. Like, I mean, let's face it, Roxana Troy, not anybody, I don't think she's anybody's favourite character, but she's an enjoyable one, at least. I think it's ironic that her best episode is the one where she gets trapped in an elevator with Odo, which has nothing to do with Deanna. She's not even in the episode. Maybe it's her best episode. She's great in the show, but let's face it, when you look at the original series, the 2 characters she played, number 1 and Nurse Chapel. Nurse Chapel is just completely devoid of any kind of personality in that show. She's just the nurse.
Actually, there is.
I mean, she flirts with Spock occasionally, but that's it.
And then there is one episode where she really does show her personality somewhat. I'm
forgetting which one that is.
The episode Obsession, when
Right.
the dichronium cloud creature, um, Kirk realizes that it's back, and it takes him back to his days, aboard the Farragut as a lieutenant,
Mm.
and how he thinks he failed and got half the crew killed.
Yeah. I remember the episode. I forget what she did in it. That's all.
Yeah, and the ensign that's aboard the ship is Ensign Gallagher. He's a security officer, one of the few security officers who does not get killed.
Mm.
Um,
Oh, apparently, in season one, there's a transporter technician named Lieutenant Kyle or
yes,
something. Apparently, he is in the original series,
which
so
they
technically, we know he survives too.
well, the thing is they renamed him for the season two.
It's a different actor. He's just another transporter technician. It's not
I
the same character though.
Yeah,
They confirmed
the
that.
thing about Kyle from season one of Strange New Worlds
Mm.
and TOS, they got a lot of backlash because actor John Winston played him in the original series,
Mm.
and John Winston was, a white guy, and now they
Yeah.
have an Asian character playing the same
Who cares?
character.
Who cares? They did the same thing with Admiral or Captain. What's his name? The guy that recalled like Pike in the first episode of season one.
April.
April. Yeah.
April was
Captain
only
April.
in the animated series, and he was voiced by James Doohan,
Yeah.
and he was
He was white.
visually a white guy.
Yeah. So they've done it before. I couldn't give less of a shit when they want to swap a character like that. Let's face it, Lieutenant Kyle was never an important character. You know, most of the time, if there was something important to do with the transporters, Scotty got to do it himself. Occasionally, Chekhov might lend a hand, but I think that was more of a thing in the Abrams universe than TOS, if I remember right.
Yeah.
But so yeah, they're gonna if they bring back Kyle, they bring back Kyle. I don't know why they would replace him. And
But then
let's
again,
face it, they shot season 1 and 2 in the same block. Like season 2 was almost finished shooting before season 1 even aired. So I doubt the backlash was the reason for it.
Well, I look at it this way. Just because somebody has the same last name as another character does not mean that they are not the same character.
True.
So-
They could be related. It might not necessarily be the same guy.
Yeah.
But I do think it's interesting.
Yeah, I view it as it's just like a guy named Smith.
Yeah.
How many
It's a
people?
pretty common name. Let's face it, Kyle is a pretty common name.
Yeah.
So, yeah. What were we even talking about to get on to Lieutenant Kyle?
We're talking about Major Barrett.
Major Barrett, yeah.
And
You're right. And in Obsession, she had a little bit more of a personality.
Yeah, when Garavik gets confined to his quarters, because Kirk sees himself in Garavik, because Garavik is actually the son of the captain of the Farragut, who got killed because of Kirk's mistake, which McCoy actually looks at the record and he says, this first officer even points it out. It was not your fault. So Garavik is now Garavik's son is serving aboard the Enterprise, gets confined to his quarters, and Chapel comes to his quarters with food, and she says, it's a medical thing. You got to eat. And she's basically acting like a mom to him at that moment. And you kind of see more than just the yes, doctor. She's actually showing.
She's got a bit of a sense of humor almost about the situation.
Yeah.
And she's, I'm trying to remember in that moment. Like, was she being nurturing or was it more of a joke? Like, oh, you big baby, come on.
I think it was a little bit of both.
That's interesting because you can imagine this new version of Chapel doing that. Like, I'll say this: I know that the timeline of her being engaged has kind of been retconned. Maybe the temporal, the time agents or something have messed with that too, or something. I don't know, but when we get into talking about episode 3 of season 2, we'll get into that a little bit more. But I'm fine with it. It was never that important to me when she was engaged. They can move it to make it so she was engaged, I don't know, 5 years earlier than originally stated or something.
Yeah.
It's not that big a deal. But I like the updates they've made to Chapel, the updates they've made to number 1 in particular, because let's face it, number 1 had very little actual screen time, especially when you consider that the original version of the pilot didn't even get released to the public until, what was it, like 87 or something? It came out on video.
85.
85. So it's like, yeah, almost 20 years after it was shot, it was finally released. Before that, you only had like the clip show elements from the trial that was
Yes.
going on. And yeah, so there's not much material really for number one, but they kind of just took that and saw an opportunity to create what's essentially a new character. And it totally works for me. I really like number one. And
Yeah.
we will get into her major episode in a moment. But obviously, season one, I would say, I think some of the best episodes were like the one where they were hiding from the Gorn in the ship.
Yes.
And the Gorn kept doing all these tactics, and it was very oh god, what's the name of the episode? Balance of Terror. It was a very Balance of Terror episode, and then later they actually went into Balance of Terror. Like, it was
Yes.
clear that that's whoever is showrunner for season one. I think it's Akiva Goldsman. You can tell that that's probably his favorite episode from TOS because it is so heavily referenced.
You know, the thing about it is you can see why Pike would not have been a good captain during Balance of Terror just by watching that episode, because he's trying to be the diplomat. He's trying to be peace, and
he's taking the Picard approach,
and it didn't work.
No,
In
you
that
needed
moment,
the Kirk. You needed someone ready for a fight.
You needed Jim Kirk ready to risk war to stop a war.
Yeah.
You know,
because let's face it, Kirk's instincts for this sort of thing have been proven throughout the entire franchise to pretty much always be right on the money. Like, if he has an instinct about something like this, he's usually right. Mostly because he was the star of the show.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's also because he's a brilliant officer. He's a brilliant tactician.
Yeah, I mean, look at Wrath of Khan. Okay, he's
Kirk at his best.
Yeah, Kirk at his best. I mean, just that moment when they find out about the distress signal from Regula. He could leave it in Spock's hands. Spock is a capable commander. He's just the visiting admiral on the ship. But you know what? He says, there's something wrong here. I've got to institute policy, and I have to take command.
Yeah.
And he did it in such a way that yes, Spock doesn't have an ego, as it were. So Spock.
Yeah, if you're going to take anyone off command and take over their ship for any reason, Spock's probably the best one to do it with, because he really isn't gonna. He's not going to take it personally. He's not going to be, yeah.
Yeah, and
he's going to be unemotional about it by design.
Remember Spock's advice to him. He says, "You are my superior officer. You are also my friend. It was a mistake for you to accept promotion."
Yeah.
You being a captain of a ship is your first best destiny. This is what you're supposed to do.
And let's face it, I mean, Star Trek Generations is not the best movie, but Kirk does echo that point when he tells Picard, don't let them ever take you off your ship. Like, that's where you need to be. That's where the action is. That's where the fun is. Yeah. And, Generations, let's face it, there were a lot of missteps in that film, but I really think it's not quite as bad as everybody says. There's some damn good moments in that film. Yeah. It's just... I don't know. I think a lot of people weren't going to like it no matter what happens, just because they killed Kirk.
The problem with Generations, okay, is Captain Harriman. Okay? Yeah. You don't put somebody that is that green in command of the flagship.
No.
You need somebody with experience, somebody who knows what the F they're doing, okay? Yeah. And every 5 seconds he's saying, oh, it'll be installed on Tuesday. It'll be installed on Tuesday. Okay, then why the heck are we taking the ship out if most of the gear is not there? Most of the crew is not there, okay? Yeah, it's supposed to be a training crew. It's supposed to just go around the solar system and then come back. But still, supposing something breaks down and we don't have this. Supposing something breaks...
You could get stranded somewhere, you know. Or you get stranded somewhere and, like, I don't know, the ship's transponder or whatever it's called breaks down, Starfleet can't locate them. They could be just, floating out there.
Yeah, and he said we don't have a medical staff. Okay,
Yeah.
you don't take a ship out even on a training voyage without a medical staff, because supposing some of the new technology explodes, who's going to fix the guy who just got blasted?
Yeah. Especially if the guy that just got blasted could be like the chief engineer, the guy that's able to fix the ship.
Or
It's
the
like, well, he
captain?
can't fix the ship because somebody needs to fix him first.
Yeah.
And it's
Or
like
the captain?
suddenly you're
Yeah.
screwed. The captain, yeah. It's like the pilot of Voyager. Like, imagine how bad shit would have been if all of the doctors got killed and they didn't have the emergency medical hologram.
Yeah.
Like, from the pilot episode onwards, they would have been a ship without a doctor for 7 years. That would have been a lot more difficult. Thankfully, obviously, the EMH is maybe the best character in Voyager outside of Seven of Nine, maybe. Although, if you'd asked me when I was a kid who my favourite character was, I would have said Neelix, just because he was funny.
Me, I would have said Tom.
Yeah. Teenage me would have said Kess, just because I had a massive crush on her at the time.
And now she's
Yeah, I
great.
wasn't even watching Star Trek at the time, but I knew who she was, and
Yeah.
I always thought she was absolutely beautiful. Very sad about obviously what happened with her, but
Yeah.
especially in the years since. I mean, less said about that stuff, the better. But
Yeah.
I know it's a little bit off topic, but there's an episode of Voyager called Before and After where Kess is traveling backwards through time uncontrollably, and they have to work out how to stop her. It's like the episode where we get the hints for the Year of Hell, which would come the year like one season later.
Yes.
It just proves to me that if they actually gave a shit, like Kess could have been a really interesting character. Like, as her mental abilities were developing, she could have been so fascinating if they just given her a little bit more to work with, a few more episodes each season, just to develop what's going on. She would have been so compelling. But they didn't.
Yeah.
Oh well. So, yeah, season one. I also very much like that season one had a lot of funny episodes and wacky episodes, and
Although the episode with Mabenga and his daughter, with the
the
fairy tale
Elysian
thing,
Kingdom. I
yeah,
like that episode.
it was a little off for me. I mean, I
It's,
enjoyed
it's,
it.
it's I would say it's probably the worst episode of the season, but it's still a good episode. The only other one I would maybe say might be slightly worse is what was it called? The Serene Squall, the one where the pirates take the ship. It's a fun episode. I just think it's kind of a nothing episode. I do hope they bring back the villain though, because the actor that played something Keitel, I forget their first name.
Hmm.
But I thought they were just fascinating, just a really fun character. So I hope that character comes back and becomes kind of a thorn in their side. Almost would be fun to turn her, like that character, into kind of the Harry Mudd of Strange New Worlds, where it's just like they come back, they cause some problems. They're not like universe-ending stuff. They're just kind of a pest.
Yeah.
I think that would be fun. At the same time, I also want Harry Mudd to return anyway, because I thought Rainn Wilson did a pretty good job. Like, he's one of the few things in Discovery I liked.
If they want to keep canon as intact as possible, they can't.
They can't have Spock or Uhura meet him, but they could probably get away with anyone else on the ship doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The episode that I like the best, okay, is the episode where we find out about number one's Illyrian heritage, which does lead us into episode 2 of season 2. Just the fact of, Pike and Spock trapped on the planet, and
there's a pandemic going on the ship. Like, it's one of the best tropes in Star Trek, isn't it? There's a disease that's somehow been brought on board the ship, and they don't know how to handle it, but maybe a couple of the people that could help are trapped on a planet, or they're trapped in a shuttle, or whatever.
Yeah,
it's classic Trek. It's great.
And I love how Pike is somewhat Kirk-like in that, when they're trapped down there, like, can you move a little faster? Can you move a little faster? Not to rush you. We're about to die.
Yeah, it's great. I would agree that's one of my favorite episodes. I wouldn't say it's in my top 3 from last season, but it's definitely up there. But yeah, it's just season one, best first season of a Star Trek show since the original, in my opinion. Like,
Yes.
I can't see that many people disagreeing with that. Just because TNG and DS9 and Voyager's first seasons are, there's good
Yeah.
stuff in there.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, there's good stuff in there, but
There's just as much bad stuff.
yeah. Whereas maybe one or two episodes of Strange New Worlds not being quite as good as the rest is still considerable improvement.
Plus the
Really,
fact that it's only 13 episodes. So
that helps. There's a lot less filler. There's a lot less. I can't see Strange New Worlds doing an episode like Masks or something like that, where it's just obvious they're running out of ideas. And it's like, oh, let's just give Brent. We'll give Brent a bunch of stuff to do. We'll just let him go mad for an episode. Who
yeah.
cares? You could tell they were sort of phoning it in with that one.
Yep.
But with only 12 episodes or 13 episodes, however many it is, I think it might even only be 10 episodes like Picard.
I think it is 13. I think.
Right. Well, it's either way, there's going to be considerably less filler as a result, or at least I would hope. So that's season one. Let's get into season two.
Yeah.
I thought the opening episode, I understand why they felt the need to open with the action episode. It's probably one of the dumber episodes of Strange New Worlds that there's been in terms of the actual way that the plot was constructed. But I still had a great time. I liked the characters. I thought the humor worked well.
And I love the introduction of actress Carol Kane as chief engineer.
How good is Carol? Like, don't get me wrong. I miss what's his name? The guy from the first season. Hemmer. Loved him. I hope they find a way to bring him back somehow.
Well, the actor is coming back. The character is not because of the whole thing with the Gorn.
Yeah. Have you heard the pitch that someone, the guy that played Trip on Enterprise? He does a podcast with one of the other guys from Enterprise, the British one.
Okay.
And it's a pretty damn good show. They've had so many people from Star Trek on it over the last few years, but they were talking about like his idea because Trip getting killed in the finale of Enterprise is something that nobody liked, including him. So he's just like, well, maybe the temporal, the time agency, maybe they pulled me out just before I was supposed to die and now I'm working as a time agent or something. I could be doing that. And he's just like, well, he mentioned this on an episode right after Strange New Worlds. He was like, maybe Hemmer's doing the same. He can be with me.
Yeah.
They're partners in the time agency or something, going around fixing time. I'd watch that show,
Although it seems a little too Quantum Leap.
It may be a little bit, They could bring Scott Bakula in it as well. Just you got to have him there, just as he'll be there as Archer instead of
and of course, the thing is that now that NCIS New Orleans is canceled, he's flopping free.
I didn't even know he was on that show. So
yeah, he was basically the lead on the show.
Is that the show that he turned down doing the new Quantum Leap for?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, that aged like milk, didn't it? Never mind.
Yeah.
If Quantum Leap hasn't been cancelled, maybe he can be in the second season.
Well, we shall see.
Yeah. So episode one, it's the opener. It's got to be action-packed. It's a little bit dumb, but it is fun. And the Klingon stuff is fun. And La'an drinking blood wine in that scene when the other guy's like drinking it, it's all dribbling down his beard, and she says to him like, "Don't try to hide half the wine in your beard." And it's like, he looks like he's gonna say something angry. And he's like, and then starts vomiting. Hilarious, just great. Yes. I love La'an as a character. I love that she can hold her own drinking blood wine against actual Klingons because we know, like from canon, like blood wine is extremely, extremely strong. Like take the strongest moonshine you've ever seen in your life and times it by 10 or 50. Like that's what blood wine is like. So that's impressive as all hell, Growing up on a Gorn breeding ship toughens you up.
Plus the fact that we later learn that there's a possibility that she might have augment DNA in her.
Yeah, so maybe she's a little bit tougher by DNA, even if she's herself has never been augmented purposely. Yes. which is cool, you know. And I hope that if they do reveal that she is slightly augmented, I hope that they don't try to do, you know, like the Ghost of Illyria thing, which is the episode I know we've just been talking about. But I hope we don't have a story where she's trying to remove her augments or something, because
Yeah.
we're going to get to episode 3 in a moment. But the way that episode ends, I don't think it would make sense for her to do that anymore. Maybe in season 1, I could see her going down that route, but not so much now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so,
Um,
so episode 1 of season 2. What did you think overall?
it was good. There were moments that I absolutely love. I mean, just the fact that Spock is trying to reason with the Klingons,
Mm.
using the whole Vulcan. I'm a Vulcan. I don't lie.
Yeah, he's like, I don't care about legends and superstition, something like that. The Klingon was. He's like, well, maybe we can just like. He's like, I can only tell the truth about someone when I look into their eyes face to face. He's like, well, then maybe we can discuss this over a barrel of blood wine. And he's like, yeah, a Vulcan
The
drinks
only
blood
problem that
wine.
I have with the scene is after he drinks the blood wine, he just starts laughing. Spock would never
He
laugh.
wasn't laughing. He was doing the whole ha sort of thing. I think I don't
I
think he was actually laughing. I think he
well,
was just trying to match their energy in
the
term
the the,
in.
the problem that I have with it is that Ethan Peck's acting in that moment is not 100% where it needs to be.
Yeah, it's not quite the best, and it's a shame that that moment is in all the trailers for this season as well. And
Yeah,
let's face it, you can watch the first episode of season 2 for free on YouTube, and it's literally the thumbnail. So I guess they thought that was going to be a more of a fan favorite moment than it ended up being. But I still think it works. I think it was Spock trying to match the energy of the Klingons. He was trying to ingratiate. Is it engross himself to them? Ingratiate himself?
ingratiate.
Yeah, he's trying to ingratiate himself to the Klingons. So he's doing what they're doing. If they drink it and go ha like that, he wants to do the same. And it's diplomacy. It's what Spock as an older man will be known for. Like when he goes to like Romulus and he's trying to heal the divide between Romulus and Vulcan. Like it may not be a perfect moment, but I can see it kind of as a building block for where Spock will end up.
Yeah,
So it's even in an episode that I would say is kind of weak compared to the rest of the show overall, it's still a damn fun episode. The only thing I think they could have made more clear is that Starfleet ship that was buried on the planet, is that an actual ship that just crashed there a while ago and they're
no,
just basically fixing it? Or did they build it from scratch?
they've been building it from scratch.
That is so dumb. It should have just been a lost starship that maybe it was like taken out in the war. They crashed it in the war. It's been buried for a while, and now the war's over. They're trying to fix it to make it fly again. Make it an actual Starfleet vessel with a registry and all of that.
It does.
That is more believable to me
Yeah,
straight after Discovery's Klingon War than
yeah.
building a ship from scratch.
It does lay the groundwork for what they're trying to do with the whole story of the broken circle. They're trying to reignite the war.
Yeah.
You know,
That
and
works. I just think building a ship as opposed to just, they could have pulled like, Star Trek Beyond. They had the crashed ship from the Archer era of Star Trek, like on the planet. That could have been what this is. Like, we've just had a war with the Klingons. Think how many Starfleet vessels were no doubt lost during those battles. There could have been one that's unaccounted for, that they assume was destroyed, but actually it was taken over and it's been hidden by the Klingons. And now somehow these people have it and they're fixing it up and trying to make it look like it's operational, even though it's basically a skeleton.
yeah,
That could have been really interesting.
because remember what they said when they find the ship down there. Spock and I think it's La'an and was it Chapel that was with them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Chapel, Mbenga, Spock, and La'an were the ones on the planet.
Yeah, and they go down, they go into the cavern, they find the ship, and one of them is like, "How did they get it down here?" And Spock's words are, "I do not believe that they got it down here. I believe they built it down here."
No,
Okay.
I obviously skimmed over that line, but
Yeah.
I don't think that should have been the
Well,
explanation. I'm sorry. It should have been
Yes.
an actual Starfleet ship, because that way it would have had like an ID, like registry code and all of that, so they could have been broadcasting on Starfleet frequencies. They would have had everything they need to convince the Klingons that it was an actual Starfleet ship. You know, any investigation, even into the wreckage of that ship, is going to prove that it was fake
Yeah.
relatively easily, because it's just like, well, okay, it's a Starfleet ship. Why are all the corpses Klingon? It's just like all these corpses floating around this wreckage in space. They're all Klingons. There's no one in a Starfleet uniform at all. Clearly, this isn't a Starfleet vessel. Like, if it was an actual ship, they could have like gone to the replicators, got all the uniforms, rest all their people in the uniforms and all that. Really made a show of it.
Yeah.
But,
The
yeah,
the thing is that they did make mention that it looks like a Crossfield class, which we know that's the Discovery.
yeah,
And it looked nothing like a Crossfield.
yeah.
So it's
I mean,
obvious
the
that they.
Discovery was heavily modified from its original class, though, because obviously the shape of the ship itself tied directly into the spore drive or something. So I think that's why it's so different. I
Yeah.
think that was part of the explanation for it. But you're right; it didn't look like Discovery. So maybe it's just like, they've heard stories from the war of what Discovery looked like, but they don't have any pictures. So they're just sort of doing it based on eyewitness testimony or something, maybe.
Yeah.
I can explain that away. Literally, my only complaint about the episode is that it's very contrived. Pike not being in it, but I can understand that because, you know,
He's working on number one's defense.
plus, yeah, I mean, there was that, but also it's the same reason Pike is barely in episode 3 as well. Like, his wife just had a baby. He was away on like paternity leave. He was away so he could spend time with his newborn child. Like, it's totally understandable. People are just going to have to accept that there's going to be a few Pike light episodes at the beginning of season 2 because of this.
Yes.
You can't hold that against the show, and I think, considering we've had now 3 episodes where Pike, I mean, he has more to do in episode 2, but still not that much. It's a lot of just him watching the screen. But they gave good enough explanations in world. Like, episode 1, he's not there because he's off to get an attorney for Una. Episode 2, he can't be on the stand because the moment they ask when he found out about her, he is either going to have to
Which
perjure
is
himself or get in trouble himself too.
Yeah, which is
Perfect
exactly what
explanation.
that Vulcan JAG officer was trying to do.
Yeah.
Which we find out in that episode. And I know that, they're using the episode 2, Una's trial, as an allegory for the trans community and how they're.
It's the trans thing. It's the Holocaust. It's like about being black. It's about being Jewish. It's like Star Trek. They have pulled little bits and pieces from all these different areas, and they pushed it together in like a sci-fi context, like an allegory, like Star Trek used to do.
That's
Star
what
Trek.
Star
Let's
Trek is
face it.
best at.
Exactly, and let's face it. If this was even just 3 years ago in one of the current era Star Trek shows, it would have been so much more heavy-handed. The fact is they contextualized, and yes, it is very much about the trans topic, but at the same time, they've put it in so much sci-fi allegory. That's what Star Trek should be doing. It shouldn't be like, oh, this is the episode about trans people. It's this episode. It's like, no, this is Measure of a Man. This is Drumhead. This is any number of Star Trek cult episodes, and this time the allegory is a combination of all these different things that are very much relevant. And I thought they handled it in a really remarkable way.
Yes, they did, and the fact that, Una is allowed to continue serving is
They
good.
did that in the only way they could. They found a technicality that opens up the conversation for later, which is obviously something that I'm guessing helped with Julian Bashir's whole situation much later on.
Yes.
But they couldn't just solve the problem because of that episode. So they found a way to sort of do a bit of both. And let's face it, when cases like this happen, they just become, what's the word? Precedents for later cases. They become things you can reference. It's like, in the case of blah 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 versus blah blah blah, the court ruled this, so there is precedent for this. And it's like, laws don't happen like law changes in law and corrections to stuff that's gone wrong doesn't happen overnight. And I thought they were really smart in saying, like, no, this isn't over, but this is just the start. It could take a very long time, but
Yeah.
at least we got the ball rolling. And I
Yeah.
thought that was really intelligent in the way to do it, because let's face it, they would have pissed a lot of people off if they had just said, okay, augments are fine in Starfleet from now on. Because it'd be like, well, what the fuck happened with Julian Bashir? They just couldn't do it.
Right.
And
they're obviously paying attention to what came later, you know,
mm,
which technically is coming before this.
yeah.
You know, I get that they're trying to, say that, oh, we should, we should respect the trans community, and I have no problem with that.
Yeah.
And there are people out there who say that, oh, trans people should be able to serve in the military.
Cool.
There's
Why
a
not?
problem with that statement. Okay, trans people are, and this actually comes from a trans person that I watched. She was on a podcast for someone called the Millennial Conservative, and she said, "Look, I have no problem with a trans person who wants to serve. It is everyone's right to want to serve their country, in the military. But the problem with it is trans people are very much like diabetics. Diabetics have to be on a medication every single day of their life to live. A
Right,
trans
and if they don't have access to it for whatever reason, if they're captured as a prisoner of war or something, that could be dangerous for them. I
yes,
understand that.
trans person has to be on, the medication for the HRT every single day.
Yeah.
If they're out in the field and their platoon gets lost, they can't take their HRT, their hormone replacement stuff. They're going to start to quote unquote revert. Okay, maybe in 100.
And I mean, and let's face it though, if that was to happen and they started reverting, I mean, what is that going to do to their sense of self?
Yes.
That would seriously just mess with your head.
Yeah.
Because I can't imagine what that must be like to go through.
I
It
can't
would be
either.
hellish.
Yeah.
I understand that completely. Hopefully, at some point, it will be, that won't be necessary anymore. Maybe they'll have a new type of medication that won't have to be taken.
Maybe by the time of the Star Trek era, the 23rd century, maybe it'll be a one-time pill that you take and you're done. But
it makes sense to contextualize that argument though with this eugenics thing, because potentially, eugenics, if trans people had what Una does, they probably wouldn't need the medication, because her system with the glowy thing when she's trying to heal and all of that stuff, she'd probably just, I don't know, maybe there'd be a way that it would just be able to hold the changes permanently without needing meds, something like that. But obviously, that's just because it's just one little part of it that helps the audience to connect and identify with the story. I'm completely fine with them using it in this context. I don't think it's super relevant with the real world parallel, really. But just purely because they did pull from so many different areas, I think it makes it work for me.
Yes.
And I thought it was really intelligently put together. I thought the way that they presented all the arguments, the whole way the case started, and you start thinking like, Una's good, like, okay, she's in the rest of the series, so we know she can't lose, but this is going bad. Like, for the first half of that court case, like when she's like grilling April on the stand, she's being like she's attacking too much. You start to think, oh, maybe they've made a mistake getting her to try this case. It's like, no, actually, it was a very clear strategy. She was setting up all of the things that she needed to class Una as a refugee and all of this stuff, so she could be allowed back into. Very, very clever.
Yeah,
I thought. So
and then at the end, when we find out who actually outed Una, it was Una herself.
Yeah. Which was the last piece of criteria that she needed, apart from the asking for what is it? Asking for not refuge, asylum. Asking for asylum, and Pike granted it. Technically, in order to actually request asylum, you actually have to say the words "I request asylum," which she didn't do. But who cares, really? That's a nitpick. But I just like that they went through it. And okay, I don't think this is a law that's been said in Starfleet before, but as they listed it off, it totally fits with Starfleet's principles and ideals, I think, in a way that's really clever. And that whole thing about the reason she wanted to join Starfleet and Starfleet's original motto, which is where we got the name of the episode, which Ad Astra something something. And
Ad
I
Astra
mean,
Aspera.
yeah, and it's like to the stars through adversity or something, I think
Yes.
is what it means. And she has this whole thing about it. And it's like Starfleet, and she talks about Starfleet and says like it's not a perfect organization, but it wants to be. And I think that is something that I think even Gene Roddenberry had trouble grasping. Like he wanted everyone to be perfect, no interpersonal drama on the Enterprise. Like humans don't do any of that stuff anymore. It's like we're
Yeah, but
human beings, we
if
have
that's
flaws.
yes, and that's where he and Berman always used to fight, on TNG,
Yeah,
because Berman is saying, if you do that, then we have no drama, and we need drama for the show.
yeah, and thankfully they did introduce those elements as time went on. DS9 especially, there's a lot of interpersonal drama on that show. Like they butt heads a lot, especially early on, but
Yeah,
even later on in the show, like towards the end, like when the Dominion War was, in full force and all of that, they still butt heads and they still question each other's ideas a few times, and it just that line in this episode that it's like Starfleet isn't a perfect organization, but it aspires to be. That's what Star Trek is. And I
yes,
think this episode is quintessential Star Trek. And, I completely see why, like, I am subscribed to a ton of Star Trek YouTube channels. Like Steve Shives, I know we both watch.
yes,
I like Orange River does some good stuff. There's in game, something certifiably in game where they do all the lore stuff
yes.
updates. There's the one that just talks about each class of ship as well. That might actually be the same guy.
Mm.
But all these channels, I think Jessie Gendo is the one though that loved this episode most purely because she is trans. So she had a lot to identify with this. So I understand why she calls it one of the best episodes of Star Trek ever made. I would say it might be the best episode of the current era of Star Trek for me. But I don't know. I feel like things are just going to get better from here. I
Yeah.
feel like this is a good sign of things to come. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the next time they do a cool episode because it just seems like they are finding what they're trying to do with this show more and more. And yeah, I loved episode 2. I just wouldn't say it's one of the best of Trek overall. Like for me, I think the best episode of Trek for me is always going to be the Visitor from DS9. Just that episode breaks my heart every time I watch it. It doesn't matter how many times I see it. Like when Jake Sisko's like, at the end of it, when old man Jake is like telling his father, like, "Don't worry, we're going to get a second chance. I had to die when you were here," and he's killing himself so they get another chance. It's heartbreaking and it's beautiful. And
Yes.
this episode's not quite there for me yet, but it's a damn good start. And it's got all the DNA in it that says if they just keep on this trajectory, this show is going to be something truly special. I believe that,
Yeah.
and yeah, I
Well,
absolutely adored it.
my all-time favorite episode of Trek, and that's The City on the Edge of Forever, which kind of
Just an
leads us in.
awesome,
Yeah, and that
yeah,
kind of leads us into episode 3,
yeah,
which I said to you before we got started today that it is very much a City on the Edge of Forever
yeah,
redux.
which is fine. Discovery has done it. They had the Guardian of Forever in I think season 3. Uh, Star Trek the animated series had the Guardian again, and like in the episode where Spock has to save himself as a young boy from an
Yes.
animal attack or something. It's like I love that sort of episode, but I thought what they did with this episode that was really intelligent is that they combined it with the temporal Cold War, the time agency, all of that stuff, the
Yes.
temporal prime directive material. Like they combined two different types of Star Trek time travel story, and they sort of smushed them together, and they made something that okay. There's some very convenient plot contrivances in this episode. Like some of the plot is just very, very, very basic, but I don't think the plot was actually the focus of this episode. It's very much a character story. It's
Yes.
all character driven.
This is
Everything that happens
all.
is because of the
This is,
characters.
this is all. It's all focused on La'an and her inability to connect with people because of her last name,
Yeah.
Noonien Singh. You know,
And ironically, Kirk is the perfect person for her to fall in love with for this episode, because we know he hasn't heard of Khan Noonien Singh. At least 7 years from now, we know he's still not heard of him.
yes. So it's very good, in that sense. And I love the opening scene when they arrive in Toronto and they're walking around and Kirk says, "Oh, it looks like New York in the 21st century." She says, "No, it's Toronto."
She even points at one of the screens and says, "Look,
Yeah.
it says Toronto right there." But it's a nice joke, because obviously Toronto always doubles for New York in movies and TV. So
Unless they actually have to film in New York for certain things.
yeah, how rare is that though? Most of the time, it is just Toronto. Like, there's a reason that companies use Toronto. It's said that it's like a city that it was built by so many different architects in so many different styles. You can literally go from like street to street, and it looks like a completely different city.
Yes.
It's just perfect for filming for that exact reason, even if it doesn't have a lot of cohesiveness in terms of its overall design.
Yeah.
But
one problem that I have with the episode
Mm.
is at the beginning, after she, walks onto the bridge and it's completely different Enterprise. And now Kirk is in command and no Pike. And
where was security? Is that what you're going to ask?
No.
It's very strange, because she walks onto the bridge, nobody knows who she is, and then she asks to speak to the captain in private, and they just go off and have a chat in private.
No, the problem I have is the Vulcan ship that hails them is captained by Spock.
Yeah.
How
is Spock alive if humanity
Yes.
and Vulcan never? Yes, you just have to imagine that Amanda was, I don't know, maybe they met off world or something instead of actually on Earth in this timeline.
Yeah. Who knows?
They did say though later in the episode that it's like the timeline keeps trying to reassert itself, because she mentions how she came back to delay humanity's progress in the early 90s. Well, she gets 1993 and Khan is nowhere to be seen. She realizes something, people have been messing with this for so long. She even has a line this was all supposed to happen in 1993. Now it's it's 2020 something and Khan is still a small boy. All these changes, all these incursions in time have delayed things somewhat, and it's like the timeline is trying to reassert itself so that events still happen when they should. But it was just a really interesting way of looking at it that goes straight back to the Berman era.
Yes.
And it's the temporal Cold War, the time agents, that stuff that was in TNG, DS9, Voyager, Enterprise especially.
Yes.
But I love that they found a way to delay when Khan happens, because I will say this, it's never been important to me whether Star Trek can be our future or not. There's people out there that really want it to be this is our Earth's future, this is where we're going. But there's other people who are no, it's an alternate history thing.
Yeah,
that's not our Earth.
You mentioned Steve Shives a few moments ago. He did an episode where he's talking about the future of us as opposed to the Star Trek future. And he said, look, maybe the Star Trek future or their past is like the first draft of history. And then here in the real world, we do something and we make the second draft, which does it better.
Yeah.
Okay? So maybe that's the way to look at it. It is an alternate timeline.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. I would even say it's not actually an alternate timeline. We're still very much in the prime timeline. I would just say that all this confirms for us is that time is just a little bit more malleable than we initially thought. It's the same timeline, but little details on that timeline are constantly in flux. And I thought that's a really smart way to handle that.
Yes.
And, I didn't need an explanation for it, but of all the explanations we could have got, I think this is a damn good one. Really.
Yeah. What I will say about it though is I'm really, really, really starting to like Paul Wesley as Kirk.
Yeah, He's
I
so
mean,
much better in this episode than he was on the last one, and I thought he was good on the last one.
yeah. But just that moment when they carjack the guy and he does a Vulcan nerve pinch and she's like, "Did you just do a Vulcan nerve pinch?" And he says,
Mm.
"Yeah, I was actually in a prison, and my cellmate was a Vulcan. He actually taught me how to do that. He also taught me how to make toilet plomeek soup." So
Great.
he's got the Kirk, charisma, the charm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, maybe he doesn't look, quite like Shatner, but
Who cares, really, though?
yeah, but he's got the beats down, and that moment where he talks about how his cellmate taught him how to do the Vulcan nerve pinch. It harkens back to a TOS episode where Spock uses the Vulcan nerve pinch, and Kirk says to him, "I've been trying to get you to teach me how to do this," and Spock says, "I have attempted, Captain." So apparently, Spock was not a very good teacher.
Either that, or maybe they just, Kirk was in prison with this other Vulcan. Maybe they just had a lot more time on their hands to
Yeah.
dedicate towards it. Maybe that's all he needed.
Um,
Yeah,
the episode, like I said, is very much, a redux of City on the Edge of Forever.
absolutely.
Go back in time, try to prevent something from happening, and we find out that the thing that she is trying to prevent from happening is the death of Khan Singh.
Yeah. Which,
Khan,
great conflict at the end of the episode. Because let's face it, everything we know about La'an, she really hates Khan. Like she if you can just think how much she would want to kill him, despite the fact that it would erase her from existence, his legacy has been nothing but a constant source of pain. And she's got
yeah,
an opportunity to wipe him from existence forever. And it would have to have been so difficult for her doing what she did. And it just the
and
maturity
it
when she
just
went into that room and she spoke with him and she was like, "This isn't going to make sense to you now, maybe it never will, but you're exactly where you need to be." Because she knows that, there's always that thing, if you could, would you go back in time and kill Hitler? This is that exact conundrum, but she
yeah,
knows what the timeline will be. If she does, she knows for a fact that the future that comes from the death of Khan is going to be a shithole where Earth is uninhabitable. Kirk has never been to Earth. He's never seen a sunset, which I do want to quickly bring up as well, just purely because we've mentioned in episodes of our show in the lead up to Strange New World Season 2 a few times the whole line about "I'm from space." So that's why he's never seen a revolving door. And we
yes,
had a bunch of ideas. Like, one was just like, oh, maybe it's just a throwaway joke and they don't want us to think about it, is what I thought maybe was happening. We could, because we knew that he mentioned in the finale for season 1 that he's from Iowa, so we knew the writers at least had that information. But now watching this episode and knowing that it's an alternate Kirk from a version of Earth that's completely uninhabitable, he's never even been to Earth.
yes,
Suddenly, that joke in the trailer, I wish we'd had this information early on, because we we discussed this a lot.
yeah,
But part of me thinks that's why they did it, because they wanted the Trek fans to have a lot of discussion before the episode aired.
yeah. And I
It's
love how
engagement.
they sneak out of the store after stealing the clothes.
That was so
Putting
clever.
yeah,
Hiding what was it? A pair of sunglasses or something in the woman's bag. It was something off a shelf.
yeah.
Just
And
very,
of
very
course, the
clever.
alarm is already going off when they walk out the store, so it doesn't need to go off again.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, that's not really nice. So I think the Canadians would be very, very upset that they did that to a Canadian.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Definitely.
but it
There's
was,
a few things like that. I'm surprised that they just threw away their old clothes, because modern fabrics from the future, I imagine, okay, it's just going to go to a dump. But say they were found,
yeah,
there's got to be something in those clothes that could affect history. But I did see a comment on YouTube for this. I think it was on Steve Shive's review for this episode, and they were just saying, so basically the timeline went like this: Voyager went back in time, accidentally brought future tech to humanity. So seeing that humanity was getting this tech too early, This tech, by the way, because it was so advanced, basically slowed down everything that was going on to do with augmentation and eugenics, because
Yes.
suddenly tech was the focus. Then the Romulans come in. It's like, oh no, they're moving way too fast. We've got to slow them down, and that's what happens. They come back to 1994, find out it's the Voyager timeline of 1994, so the eugenics wars have just not happened. And then 30 years later, this whole thing happens, and they explained it better than I just did there. But the way they laid it out was like, actually, this makes a lot of sense. Um, there's a few people that are getting mad about the whole change to the timeline thing with when Khan happened and all of that. It's the same people that were complaining after the very first episode of Strange New Worlds when they declared in that the eugenic wars and World War Three kind of are the same thing. They just sort of merged and there was overlap. People
Well,
didn't like it.
you could look at it this way, and I think it was either Steve Shives or Orange River who pointed this out.
Mm,
Wars can be looked at like this. The eugenics wars and World War III could be considered, an overall one thing conflict like World War One and World War II. Remember, World War
mm,
II happened because of unresolved issues from World War One 20
mm.
years later.
And let's face it, World War Two didn't end with the death of Hitler. Like there were still conflicts for a few years afterwards that were still technically part of World War Two. They were just sort of things getting finished.
Yeah.
Like it took time. I think it was like I forget all the different places that there were, but like Hitler died. Technically, the majority of it was over, but there were still a few conflicts that hadn't resolved themselves yet, and there
Well, I
were
think it
different.
was only a few months. It wasn't a couple of years.
I thought it was a couple of years, but maybe I'm wrong.
Because
It's been a
Hitler,
while. I used to watch a lot of documentaries on World
yeah,
War
Hitler
Two, but
died
it's
in
been a while.
May,
Mm,
very end of April, very beginning of May of 45. Germany didn't, you know, surrender for at least another month
mm.
because, they were still fighting, and
I think the Korean War was technically something that spun out of World War Two, if I remember right.
I think
I
so.
think you could technically make an argument that the Korean War was one of the later conflicts of World War Two, but then you can also argue that it's its own thing. So it's
Yeah,
it's it's just like this. It's the eugenics in World War Three. It's very hard to say where one thing ends and the other begins because they do kind of just merge.
yeah,
Especially once you've got, you know, all this time has passed. Suddenly we've got all the hindsight and stuff going on. It's like, well, maybe it didn't feel like it at the time, but now in hindsight, yeah, they kind of are part of the same general conflict. And yeah, I,
yeah.
I always thought it was smart.
Look at the whole thing with the Gulf War. The Gulf War happens in the early 1990s,
Mm,
and then things are kind of calm for 7, 8 years, and then all of a sudden 9/11 occurs.
yeah,
So of course the you know the war in Iraq occurs, the
yeah,
war in Afghanistan occurs. It's all a part of the same thing.
yeah. So I think, Star Trek Strange New Worlds making that sort of argument, I think is smart. I think a lot of people, honestly, if you were to say that a lot of these explanations that Strange New World has given, if you were to say that Terry Matalas had written that explanation and he was writing it into Star Trek Legacy, I think a lot more people would be accepting of it just because he's the one that came up with it.
Right.
Strange New Worlds, there's a lot of people that don't like it purely because they still, even though it's nowhere near as woke as Discovery was, there's still people that hate it because there's a woman on the bridge with short hair who makes quips, and they don't like that. And
I have no problem with Ortega's. I think.
no. Oh, I know you don't, but there are people out there that it doesn't matter how many good episodes Strange New Worlds makes, doesn't matter because they're going to hate it anyway.
Yeah,
And it's like you could give the exact same line of dialogue to a character in Strange New Worlds or a character in Picard Season 3, and they will love it in Picard Season 3, they will hate it in Strange New Worlds. I just think it's sad.
Yeah,
Really.
I like Ortega's because she reminds me a lot of the interaction between Sulu and Chekhov, especially
Yeah.
the episode when the Deadly Years when they were all aging,
Mm.
and Chekhov is just sitting at his station. He's saying, "One more pint of blood, Chekhov. Get on the table, Chekhov." And Sulu just looks at him and says, "You okay?" He says,
Mm.
"No, I'm a pincushion."
Yeah. It's funny, like Episode 2, we had that scene in the mess hall where Spock and that Vulcan admiral are sitting having a conversation, and Ortegas is sitting there with the Doctor, Mbenga,
Yeah.
and she's literally saying, "Oh, Mr. Spock, would you care to play a game of Calto later? I would love to." And it's like all of this, and she's doing all the voices, and he's like, Vulcans don't, like Mbenga says, like, Vulcans don't give you much, but look at their body language. Those two hate each other. And then Spock comes up, he's like, I apologize that the two of you had to see that outburst. And it's like
that's the one part of that episode that I don't like. It's that,
you didn't like that?
well, I get why they did it, but Vulcans we know are very reserved, and Spock would never have acknowledged that.
But they're his friends. I think he would have done for them.
I think he would have acknowledged it to Mbenga, but not to Ortegas.
I don't know. I think he likes Ortegas.
Yeah, he knows that Mbenga sees this. He doesn't know that she can see it as well. So he might have said to Mbenga later on, I apologize for what happened.
True. I don't see it as so much of a problem, just because I think he works so closely with them that it's okay. Plus, I mean, Vulcans do have exceptional hearing.
Yeah.
We know that. So he was probably listening to Ortegas doing all of that dialogue between the two. He was probably sitting there hearing Ortegas in his left ear doing all his dialogue, and just like
yeah. It just reminds me of that whole scene in TOS where McCoy says, "Don't tell Spock that I think he's the finest first officer in the fleet," and Spock says, "Why, thank you, Doctor," and he says, "Yeah, you're worried about his Vulcan eyes, you forgot about his Vulcan ears."
Yeah, it's great. Maybe if they'd added that line too. Just like maybe after saying I apologize, you had to see this outburst. Like maybe if he then turned to Ortegas and says, Vulcans have exceptional hearing, and then just turns and walks off, doesn't even wait for her to say anything. That could have been.
I wouldn't be a bit surprised if there's like a deleted section of that where he does say that, and they just cut it for timing.
Who knows? But either way, I thought it was a really funny moment. I think it's maybe even the best piece of Ortega's humor that they've had in a while. Even if the little bit at the end from Spock there didn't make you laugh quite as much, I thought it worked. But yeah, let's face it, like, there are people that get mad at Ortegas just for making jokes and stuff like that. But like they would say nothing about Scotty getting drunk as often as he did, or
yeah, but remember, there's one thing about Scotty getting drunk. He could still do his job drunk.
Oh, yeah, that's why they didn't say anything. But, I mean, seriously, what's worse, getting drunk on the job or making a few jokes?
I would say getting drunk on the job.
Yeah, and, plus, people made jokes all the time in TOS, Most episodes ended with a joke on the bridge and the captain sitting on his chair laughing like that.
Yeah.
Almost every episode ends with a joke. But TOS was very funny at times. It's one of the things that I love most about it, and it's why this show being so funny works.
One of the funniest moments that I have ever seen in an episode of TOS. Okay, it's in Mirror Mirror. Now you wouldn't think that there's anything funny in Mirror Mirror. It's just after that scene where Kirk gets assaulted in the corridor, and he has Chekhov arrested, and McCoy meets him in his quarters, and he sees the dried blood on his face. He says, "What's that?" He says, "It's cold blood, Doctor." It's almost like he's saying, "Bones, you're a doctor. You should know exactly what that is."
Yeah. It's a great episode, Mirror Mirror. But this show is funny because, as I said earlier, like Lower Decks, I like, but it has never made me laugh. It made me laugh once. There was an episode where they showed the lower deckers on a bunch of different ships. Like there was the Romulan ship, and I think there was a Ferengi ship or something. Actually, I think it was Klingon. It was like a Romulan ship, a Klingon ship, and then right at the end of the episode, as the credits roll, it just cut to a Borg cube, and it was just the lower deckers on a Borg cube, just standing in their alcove, not doing anything, just standing there, and it was just silence as the credits played over the top. That made me laugh because it's like, yeah. The Borg lower deckers would be doing absolutely nothing. They just stood in an alcove ready to be deployed as drones.
Yeah.
And that made me laugh. It's the only joke in Lower Decks that's managed to make me laugh. So it's, yeah.
Yeah.
I like the show. Strange New Worlds has made me laugh than the show that's actually supposed to be a flat out comedy.
Yeah.
But yeah.
One
Anyway,
thing, one
I
thing
think
that
we
I
should
do
wrap
want,
this up.
yeah, one thing I do want to talk about as
Mm.
far as um, episode 3. We find out that it's the Romulans, of course, involved,
Of
and
course.
just that sequence where the person who was taking the pictures turns out to be a deep cover Romulan agent,
Mm.
and just that scene where she shoots Kirk and she says, "Well, at least I'll go down in history as the one who killed James T. Kirk."
Mm.
That's something that would go into the minds of a Romulan. I get to be the one to kill James T. Kirk.
Yeah. And it's funny, I've seen so many people complaining about her as a Romulan, saying they didn't buy her as a Romulan. It was like, what part of undercover don't you understand?
Yeah.
She'd be a pretty damn terrible spy if she just walked around acting all Romulan all the time. People are like, what the hell's wrong with this chick?
Yeah. Plus the fact that
she's been there for 30 years as well. She's learnt how to be human.
Yeah. Plus the fact that she said that one line that she has where she says, the one thing I still haven't gotten used to is the ears.
That was cool.
Yep.
Which does say something though, because I guess it still holds the thing that La'an doesn't know what a Romulan actually looks like, because theoretically she could have changed more than just the ears. They don't know what Romulan's facial structure even looks like at this point in history. So she's got the comment on the ears, but that's basically all they've got to go on Romulans is their ears don't look like human ears. For all they know from that basic description, the Romulans could look like the Ferengi.
Yes.
There's no way of knowing. So I thought it was a clever little way. We've got a nice little subtle joke there, but it's not anything universe breaking. And
right.
I just appreciated them holding back a little bit with that. But anyway, I think that's just about it for this episode, really. I do want to say that I thought the romantic subplot between La'an and Kirk worked. I'm not really a fan of romance subplots in this, but because we knew it was doomed from the start, it worked for me. It was a tragedy. I thought that worked. I don't know if you have any comments just on that.
I think it worked so much mostly because of the fact that because he'd never heard the name Noonien Singh, that's why it worked. And that's why
she fell for him, because he's the one person that's not going to be looking at her and seeing calm.
Yeah. And just the end sequence when she contacts the prime timeline Jim.
That was so heartbreaking. She holds it together and she's so strong. The moment the call's ended, she just breaks.
Yeah.
And it was heartbreaking. And it's like, I don't think it would be nearly as heartbreaking with any other character on this show, but because La'an is so strong all the time, to finally see her break down, that was impactful. There was something special about that, I thought.
Yeah. And just the fact that she reacted the same way that Jim did in City on the Edge Forever.
Yeah, it's like Jim was like, let's get the hell out of here, wasn't he? He was like, his hand was shaking or something, and he was just, let's get the hell out of here. It's like the most we'd seen Kirk affected by a mission up to that point. Obviously, when the movies came, he would be affected by more and more, especially the death of his son and the death of Spock and all of that stuff. But I thought it was really emotionally engaging. I thought it was great.
I get the fact that she wanted to see if there would still be some kind of spark between
she was calling because she wanted to know if he'd been born on Earth or in space, because if he was from space. But if she knew this Kirk was from space, she'd know she'd made alterations to the timeline, and maybe there'd be a chance she could get her Kirk back. When she hears that no, he's from Iowa and all of this, it's confirmation that her Kirk is dead. That's the way I took it.
But
I'm reaching a little bit, but that's what I
really think that there was a part of her that was trying to reach out and see if there'd still be the same spark. And he
Yeah,
just
and it
seemed to be
wasn't.
like, you're just a security officer just trying to check up on my brother.
Yeah.
You know,
He has no reason to think it otherwise, you know. But no, I thought it worked really well. I thought it was a really quite beautiful moment. I will say as well, it is so on character, like so on brand for the time agency or the temporal agents, whatever you want to call them. I think they've changed their name a bunch of times, even in canon. So like, sometimes it's temporal Cold War, sometimes it's temporal war, sometimes it's wars as a plural, but yeah, they pick up an agent from somewhere in time, throw them into a dangerous mission that's going to completely destroy them emotionally, and then send them home, give them a quick thank you. By then, don't tell anyone about this, will you? You can't talk about this with anyone. Bye. And then they break down, and it's like, it's
but
so.
there
They
is
do
someone,
that with
who can talk to her about it.
the
Pelia.
engineer, Pelia. Yeah. Like, and they did say, the time agent said, you cannot discuss this with anyone from this time. Technically, Pelia was there too, so she doesn't count. She's also from there, so
So
they can talk.
yeah,
Plus, Pelia
hopefully,
would remember her. And the
yeah,
implication almost is that the reason Pelia is an engineer now is because of Laan meeting her and
yeah,
telling her that this is what you're supposed to do. So
yeah.
it's got an
So
interesting little thing there.
I'm sure there will be like a throwaway line down the road where
Yeah.
Pelia says, "Thank you,"
Yeah.
and then she says, "What happened to him?" And then she's just holding it together, but you can see she's not. And she says, "He didn't make it."
Yeah. I hope that it's the thing that sparks a friendship between those two characters, because I think they had some really good chemistry in this episode. I think they're going to be a really fun duo. You know, let's face it, the two best friend trope in Star Trek is always fun to see. It's like Julian Bashir with it could be either Garrick or O'Brien, depending on the episode.
Yeah.
Garrick, I mean, let's face it, Andrew Robinson says that Garrick's primary motivation is just that he wants to sleep with Julian. But he said that was clear to him from the script from the very first episode.
Mm.
That's what Garrick wants. He
Yeah.
just, But then you've got those two as best friends. You've got Geordie and Data as well. What a beautiful friendship they have. You've got, Tom
Kirk and
Paris
Spock.
and Harry, Kirk and Spock, or Kirk
and
and
McCoy.
Harry Kim and Tom Paris. You've got even, Seven of Nine and the Doctor.
Yes.
Seven of Nine and the Doctor should have ended up together. I'm sorry. I don't know why they put her with Chakotay. Everybody could have seen that she should have ended up with the Doctor.
Well, she eventually didn't end up with Chakotay because she's now with Raffi.
Which I like. I didn't like Raffi much in the first two seasons, but season 3 managed to make her interesting. I liked that. And I think her and Seven kind of makes sense. I don't think they're together by the end of Picard season 3, though. I think they're still split up. They're just working together, like best friend type thing, which is nice. But yeah, that's basically it for our Strange New World talks. Don't really know how long it will be before we do another dedicated Trek discussion podcast. The whole point of us doing Superboy Beyond now is so that we can occasionally just do one of these things, but we may just release it on a different day.
Yeah.
So,
since we are recording it the week starting July 2nd, it was just announced this past week who our new Superman is, and that's David Cornsweet.
Yeah, and Lois Lane is Rachel Brosnahan, who I've seen in The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel on Amazon Prime, and she was born to be Lois Lane. She is incredible in that show.
Yeah.
I mean, as soon as I started watching that show, when it first started airing in that, I was just like, man, if they ever do like a Golden Age era Superman, she should be Lois Lane.
Yep.
I think she can still do it in modern day, but it's funny because she has the Fleischer Lois Lane, or a little bit of the Noelle Neal flavour in her performance, and I think she's going to smash it.
I will say it was just announced this morning. It's kind of a rumor right now.
Hmm.
They're possibly casting Brendan Fraser as Jonathan Kent. Possibly.
Wow. If that happens, that's perfect casting. Yeah, I think that would be good. He'd also be a pretty good Jor-El,
Well, we
He's
shall
got the
see what
acting
happens.
chops. He's a really legit actor. I wouldn't count him out for anything. He could be fucking Luther, even as far as I'm concerned. He very rarely plays bad guys. I think he could do it.
Yeah.
Uh,
We shall see what happens. You know, it hasn't. It's not official. It's just a rumor right
yeah,
now.
would be cool though. Like I've always said, like Brendan Fraser, like if they were to do another Star Trek show, I know Legacy is probably going to be the next Star Trek show that happens if Paramount Plus gets their shit together and actually gets Metallus back. But if they were to do another show in 5 to 10 years and it was a new ship, new captain, Brendan Fraser as the captain of a Starfleet vessel would be just
He's very Kirk-like, you know, in the
yeah.
way he acts. You
But
know,
because he's also older now, he could probably bring some of the diplomacy stuff that Picard has. He could be like a really interesting character. I think he would have elements of Cisco as well, possibly even some Archer. But yeah. So yeah, we've got a new Superman, new Supergirl. Well done to David Corenswet and Rachel Brosnahan. I can't wait to see. I haven't seen David Corenswet in anything.
neither have I.
I purposely am not going to watch him in anything else because I always think Superman should be an unknown. You know, it's like casting Sylvester Stallone or Clint Eastwood as Superman. It's just no. There's Clint Eastwood on wires. It's the same reason I didn't want Nicholas Hoult to get the part. I think he's a very good actor, but if he was playing Superman, it would just be Nicholas Hoult on wires. It wouldn't be Superman for me. I wouldn't be
He
able to
would be a
suspend
good
my
Luthor.
disbelief. Luther is different. Luther can be cast with a star. I mean, just look at Gene Hackman
Yeah,
or Kevin Spacey, or you know, I mean,
John Shea.
John Shea was fantastic. Michael Rosenbaum is probably my favorite Lex. Sherman
And don't
Howard.
forget our favorite, Sherman Howard.
Yeah, Sherman Howard is just astounding. He's a completely different type of Lex to the others. Actually, he's probably closest to the Gene Hackman of any type, really, just because they both had that sort of manic energy occasionally.
Yes.
But yeah, I don't know. You can still cast a star as Lex, and the
Yeah.
same for Jor-El. You know, I do think having Brendan Fraser as Pa Kent would be good. I hope they don't kill him off this time. I think it would be interesting for this time in the movies to actually keep the Kents
Well,
alive like they did
what
for
James Gunn
Lois
has
and
said
Clark.
is Legacy is not an origin movie. So I don't think we're going to kill him off. I think he's just going to be there, you know, just as, you know, Clark goes back to the farm and he's like saying, what do I do? And Jonathan,
which is what we had in Superboy, is what they had in Lois and Clark.
Yeah.
And I love those relationships. Like Ma and Pa Kent for me are two of the main reasons Lois and Clark works for me. I love those versions of the characters. They might even be my favorite version of Jonathan and Martha.
Yes.
And you know, Smallville does well, and Superman the movie. I mean, for what they are, they do a damn good job. But
well, come on, it was Glenn Ford playing Pa Kent. You know,
you can't go wrong with Glenn Ford. You just can't. But it's, you know, I do think the Lois and Clark version had the best Ma and Pa, in my opinion. But we're really dragging this on now.
Yep.
This was supposed to be a shorter episode than our regular podcast.
Yep.
We're at 1:22, so we're going to cut it short now. I hope you all enjoyed watching. As I say, don't know when the next time we'll do a Trek one will be. We'll just, yeah, maybe after another 3 episodes of Strange New Worlds, we'll come back and just do the next 3 or something. That'll be fun. Thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Leave us some comments. If you have any suggestions for commentaries or podcast topics or anything you'd just like us to discuss on the show, leave us a comment. We always do our best to do what we're asked. So thank you all.